everybody, and welcome to this week's There's a Will. We will be looking at broad issues that really are affecting us in Central Europe and Western Europe, Eastern Europe, if you will, over the period running up to Christmas. That is the end of the year. With me in the studio to discuss is so-called Nicholas Richardson.
Delighted to be here once more, adding a bit of tone to your show, I suspect.
Yeah.
Now,
I had a question for you. Did you change your name to impress me? Is that
No.
how you,
No,
is your name really, last name really Richardson?
indeed it is.
A lot of people ask me, they stop me on the street and they say, there's a very charming man on your show. Did he change his name under your influence?
I did not change
Or to impress
my
you?
name to impress you.
You did not?
No.
Okay.
It's
There you have it,
the name I've
folks.
always had.
He did not change his name to impress me. Stop asking. Tired of it. Okay. That's the answer, definitive.
Definitive.
Well, there's so much happening that it's hard to know. You know, when I get you in the studio, I like to have a conversation with you. You're a newscaster. You're a man with his finger on the pulse or on the neck of contemporary society.
Yes, if only it were true.
Your foot on the face of contemporary politics.
If only that were true.
Yeah, and you're appearing on various television networks.
From time to time, yes.
Yes, you do.
I do.
I've seen you.
Oh,
And
that's nice.
if I haven't
That
seen
makes
you,
one.
you always remind me. So it's inescapable, really.
It is.
Yeah. I'll be relaxing at home, and the phone will ring 3 a.m., and it'll be you, won't it? Oh, have you seen my latest clip?
I don't think it is me at 3 a.m. I think you're mistaking me for somebody else, but anyway.
Well, it is not my evil twin brother,
No.
Romondo.
Yes.
It's not him.
Good.
It sounded a lot like you, but Romondo is known to be a wizard of accents.
Okay.
Yeah, the Merlin of accents.
The Merlin of accents.
Now that'll get you stirs the British blood as soon as you start mentioning anything to do with King Arthur.
King Arthur, yes.
You guys get really
Camelot.
You get really excited.
We do.
I used to love to do that. I just walk down the street and go, "In King Arthur's day," and people just stop and look at me.
Yeah. They would do.
Why are you doing that bad English accent? They would
yes.
say.
Yes.
They would.
It is a bad English accent.
There's a lot going on. We got elections. I mean, this show is airing the day before the election. I don't want to talk about the election.
'cause
There is one.
There is one.
And it's so intricate, it's hard to describe.
It is, for people who don't follow it on a daily basis, it is a bit tricky.
Let's just say that there'll be a government. It will probably be a minority government, and it will be a coalition as it has been for
Well, you
gosh,
tend to
a
get
long time.
coalitions if you have a proportional representation system.
Yeah, I think that's the point to talk about. What explain to us, I mean, you're a man of the world. You're known for your vivacious vivisection of contemporary events and ideas. And, you know, they say events are what make the world go round. Events. Without events, we'd have nothing.
We'd have nothing.
I think it
But
was,
Harold Macmillan was always frightened of events.
he was.
Events, dear boy, events, I think was what he said when everything's under control.
And he also said, crisis, what crisis?
No, that was
Callaghan.
Jim Callaghan.
That
yeah.
was Callaghan. Yeah.
About 16 years later.
Yeah, he was later. They were both tall, and that's why they remind me one
Yeah,
of
they were
one of
both.
the
And
other.
they were both prime minister.
Yeah, and they were from totally different parties.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Callaghan was more of a raver than Macmillan.
Don't think I would describe Callaghan as a raver.
Macmillan was a cocktail party guy.
Was he?
Yeah, martinis, very dry,
Very dry.
like his wit.
Ah ha ha ha.
Anyway, yeah, what's the difference between proportional representation, which they have here in Europe and Germany, most countries in the European Union have some form of proportional representation, but not the United States and not Britain. What's
No.
the difference?
Well, in proportional representation, the parties win in Parliament a number of seats roughly proportional to their vote. Some, and Poland is one, have a provision where if you get less than, I think it's 5% of the votes, you don't get any seats at all. But after that, you then do get a seat. So if you get 40% of the vote, you probably end up roughly with 40% of the seats in Parliament. It also depends on what sort of proportional representation you have as to how votes are
Yeah, the French one is
divided
very
up.
intricate,
Divided
isn't
up.
it?
Whereas in America and the United Kingdom, it's quite simple. You have a constituency or a congressional district in your case, and the person who gets the highest number of votes is elected the representative of that district. I prefer our system because it's a direct link between the voter and the person elected, which is why in our system, particularly in the United Kingdom, come a general election, often very prominent politicians lose their seats because enough people in their constituency decide, we don't like this character, we're voting him or her, we're going to vote for somebody else, and they lose their seats. You do not see prominent politicians lose their seats ever under a proportional representation system, particularly a system like Poland, because they have party lists. So essentially you vote for the party and the party decides who you actually get, which I think is not a good system. I like the accountability of one person in your constituency, and then if you don't like them next time, your vote does count to remove them, in fact, which you don't see in continental Europe to the same extent.
Right. So here is
And it does tie the politicians in our system much more closely to their locality. I remember David Cameron always saying that when he was Prime Minister and Angela Merkel visited Chequers one weekend, she was amazed to see that he spent time on constituency business, that is letters from his constituents and things of that nature. She clearly thought this was beneath the work of a Prime Minister. But
so politicians are,
so I think they're much more
yeah,
accountable, much more closely
when they're tied up.
Tied to their constitution, which is how it should be in democracy.
Yeah,
I believe.
Yeah, when they're.
And also, I think the other point. Okay, in America, you only really have
how does this free flow? Go ahead.
You in America, you only have two principal parties, but it does give you a much more decisive result. Except occasionally it doesn't. But on the occasions it doesn't in the UK context, that's because the electorate collectively somehow have exercised will to make sure it's not decisive. That's why you have occasionally minority governments or governments with very tiny majorities. Whereas in a proportional representation system, you're always having to look at the votes, look at who's been elected, and then do deals, because no party ever seems to get on its own a majority. So in Poland, you've had a series of coalitions. I think one of the worst examples, and it's probably Israel, where they're always having to do a coalition, and you always have to then have some of these very small extremist parties in the coalition, and that then sets the tone for the whole thing. And so I think proportional, and people are always like the Liberals in the UK are always saying, oh, let's have proportional representation, but I think it wouldn't work. It doesn't give you the decisive result, and people would then miss the direct result. I think they have proportional representation for the Scottish Parliament, and we can see what a great success that has been.
Well, they just lost the by-election, not.
They just lost a by-election, but that's for Westminster.
Not long ago. Yeah.
The Westminster Parliament, not the separate devolved Scottish Parliament, which I think does have proportional representation.
They don't need a devolved parliament. It's silly.
It is silly.
They already have county councils.
This was one of Tony Blair's many disastrous assaults.
Just adding another layer
on the
of
British
bureaucracy.
Constitution, but that's a slightly different argument.
Yeah, it's a layer of bureaucracy you don't need. You've got
you don't
EU.
Need,
you've
you
got
don't,
well, you don't have EU.
We
now.
don't have the EU anymore, no. But yeah, you're right. There's too much of this.
You did have the EU.
You had the
at
EU
the same time.
exactly.
So you had that. You had the local parliament. You had the big parliament. You had county councils. And it becomes ridiculous.
It does. I think it does become ridiculous.
It's overrepresented.
Then it's another layer of politicians. It's another layer of expense. It's another layer of people who are out for themselves in many cases.
Yeah.
And it's just not as good. But that's my view.
So at any rate, we're going to have a coalition government. Here.
I think that's true.
Whether it's the present government that continues or the opposition, we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see. Okay. Soon, tomorrow.
No. Yes.
This show is.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes. Very soon.
You cover. You and I haven't had time to talk about this, but you cover the Middle East for
There
TVP.
is a program, yes, a program called
Tell
Middle
us
East.
about your program.
It's a program. It's called Middle East Observer. It goes out on TVP. That's the English language Polish state television service on a Monday evening. I can't quite remember what time it goes out, and we talk about the Middle East. So and we interview people from the Middle East who are either in the Middle East or have recently visited, and we talk about all sorts of issues, and we try and cover a broad range. So most recently the program was about Lebanon. We've had programs about Israel, all the areas, and then various aspects, refugee crises, is Saudi Arabia becoming a more important world power? All these sorts of things. And because the Middle East is very interesting, because when you look at it, you have, it's like, as I was saying in each program, it's like a kaleidoscope, because you have countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey all have slightly different interests. Where do they stand on the Ukraine war? Where do they stand with Russia? They're allied with Russia in one hand. Where do they stand with the United States? How do these things, where do they stand with Israel? Saudi Arabia and Israel were getting quite close at one point. Whether the events of last week change that will remain to be seen. So it's a very interesting area.
Well, what happened recently? I mean, we're watching that daily at the moment. Is that as big a deal as it seems?
Hard to say, isn't it? You never quite know what's going on long term. I mean, I think there are some fundamentals. Large parts of the Middle East.
Okay, what happened at first?
Well, there's this attack from Gaza by missiles and by people, and gunmen, Palestinian gunmen or gunmen from the Palestinian territories running around taking hostages in parts of Israel, which is something which shouldn't have been able to happen.
Kind of a mini Tet offensive.
Yes, it's sort of a mini Yom Kippur, in fact.
Yeah.
And it was on a holiday, which of course you wouldn't expect. So it came as a great surprise and a shock, obviously, and people were killed. But it seems that there is this long-running problem. It doesn't seem it is. And I don't know how, there's a lot of nice words talked about it. I don't know how you're going to solve it, where you still have a situation where the West Bank, every few minutes, somebody's gnawing away and occupying another bit of territory. And this is the point. It sort of seems to paint the Palestinians into a corner where there's nothing they can do to improve the situation. They say, oh, we've got to defend ourselves against terrorist attacks. That people are saying, well, you squeeze us into Gaza, what can we do? You don't let us develop the country economically. You're forever taking bits of territory in contravention of various United Nations resolutions. And it's hard to know. And I think many other Middle East countries are now beginning to think, well, maybe we can do so. I mean, there's, as I mentioned, there is this Israel and Saudi Arabia have come closer recently. So that was
under the last American administration.
Yeah, exactly. So that is probably a positive.
And what happened to that? It wasn't pursued, or?
Well, I think these things have move very slowly in the Middle East, and then of course you have Russia and people and what are these various Middle East
Ukraine
countries?
has changed everything.
Ukraine has changed a lot.
Yeah, we're forgetting about the Middle East. That's why I'm asking you about it.
And then the slight perceived, at least, American disengagement from the Middle East has also changed things slightly. Then you have the perennial problem of Iran and its nuclear ambitions. And the Saudis have said, well, if Iran has a nuclear capability, we expect to have one as well. And then you think, well, Iran maybe can't do it on their own, but Russia probably could help them. And Russia needs Iranian help for ammunition to fight into Ukraine. So it's a very fluid area, and there's a lot happening. And then, of course, you've got the new refugee problem, a lot of Syrians moving into Lebanon. Is Lebanon going to become, Lebanon, you can see the Cyprus coast from Lebanon. Is it going to be the next place where we have large numbers of small boats and refugees trying to get to the European?
So the whole thing
is getting very, very complex. And meanwhile, in Europe, we wonder how is America going to behave, because, well, America and Europe has been giving a lot of aid to Ukraine. It seems that from an American point of view, the American aid to Ukraine has become caught up in these congressional machinations where
I want to get to
the
that
speaker
later.
was removed.
I want to stay with the Middle East, and I
Yeah.
want to come back to a point you raised. And we're going to talk about that, but I want to handle what's going on in the United States
Of course,
vis-a-vis
separately.
Ukraine and what's going on with Ukraine more geopolitically in the second half. But right now, I think we've talked about this before privately. There was a film some time ago that both of us remember.
A long time. I mean, what's quite interesting, I mean, it must be, 30 years ago?
Must be, yeah.
Channel 4, I think, made it.
It was a Channel 4
in the
film.
UK.
Tell us what the film was
the
about.
film was about, it was essentially about large numbers of people in Africa suddenly waking up one day and collectively marching up Africa to reach the Mediterranean and to make their way into Europe. I mean,
That's right.
and this was written.
How did they come? How did they come to Europe in the movie? I don't remember that.
I don't remember the day. I think some by boat.
Yeah, did they like cross into Spain or something?
Yeah,
like
it
that?
was something.
Like
and it was just. But it was
at Gibraltar. There was
yeah, but
something
it,
like
but
that.
it was the point was there were just so many
knew
people
that.
involved. It was a huge, not like we've seen now, but a huge movement of people.
Yeah, it was like a million,
Yeah,
millions of people.
it was this sort of
So they just started walking.
They all started walking out.
Which is funny because I've always said the Chinese and the Indians, Indians are a little more sophisticated, but I always said the Chinese, all they had to do was send 100 million people to their border with Russia and just say, go on, take it.
But that's effectively what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah,
The-
it is,
the-
but that was always my idea. I mean, for years.
But slowly they're
when I
moving
was
over the
studying,
border.
that was the idea.
They're trading. They're setting up little shops and whatever, and they're just more and more of them are moving over and
Yeah.
sort of annexation by stealth.
So, with this image in mind of this film, which was a long time ago, why is, I don't know, the third world, the underprivileged, the whatever it's called these days, let's call it the third world, why is the third world coming to Western Europe and the United States, etc., if in fact, as so many of our own people tell us, we are odious
Well, we
to the
may be.
world.
Well, we're not odious to the world, but they think
But that's
we
what
are.
people are.
Yes,
there's
they're
this
coming.
whole,
They're coming for, I think, a number of reasons.
Yeah.
One, many of them, I think, are genuinely motivated by a need, a wish to better their lives.
yes.
And if you come from some of these countries which are miserable, anything, even the odious Europeans.
But if our country is so bad, as
yeah, but they
people
don't.
on
But,
the
but
left
to the
are
people,
saying,
yeah, but
why
but they're
should these
not
people
bad
come
for the
here?
people coming from places which are even if you accept.
So why
their
are they
argu-
bad? I mean, you see the point? I'm
Yeah,
making?
yeah,
Why
because-
are they bad?
Because
makes
this
no
is
sense.
this is the left wing attack on this
But it makes no sense.
self-destructive urge that the
It's
left
like the
wing
old
has.
communist propaganda. It's like talking out of both sides of your mouth at the same
Exactly.
time in order to confuse you, so
exactly.
that they can
So I think one
increase their own power.
group of people just want to better themselves.
Hmm.
Another group of people which are fleeing war or pestilence or whatever it is, but they seem to be a much smaller group these days. I think, we're told that part of it is about climate change as well, that certain regions are becoming uninhabitable. I think that's less of an issue today. But I think also there's a great pull factor, two pull factors. One,
Okay.
more and more people in the so-called third world now have access to mobile telephones, and they can see and video and such like, and they can see the big contrast between life in Europe and life where
Do
they
you know
have
what
to live.
yeah.
And their perception, I had recorded just before coming into this program an episode of Middle East Observer.
Mm-hmm.
And this was about Lebanon, but the person who we were interviewing had recently been in Tripoli and had been talking to some of the migrants who were about to hop onto a boat to try and get across the Mediterranean to Lampedusa.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, but why are you going to Europe? And they said, but because in Europe there's such good social security. But he said, you're 30, you're young. Why do you think about social security when you could easily work? But they have this in this fixed idea in
Well,
their mind that you go to Europe and you are looked after come what
And you
may.
don't have to work.
And you don't have to work.
Which just goes to show the whole welfare idea of,
And the other
from the
point,
conservative
and the other
side,
point is, which is, a
that
big-
it makes people
And the other
lazy.
point is the big issue nobody's ever sent back.
Yeah, the deportation.
The
doesn't
deportation is, the tragedy is, I know what it's like in the United States, but if an English or British citizen living in Poland, for example, marries a Pole and wants to go back and live in the United Kingdom, unless the spouse is earning a certain amount of money, that actually becomes effectively impossible. And yet people can arrive on a rubber dinghy who shouldn't be there in the first place, and what happens? They're taken away and they're given accommodation overnight, and that's the beginning, and they're never deported. And this is part of the problem. So the message to people is, you've just got to get to Europe, just got to get land physically in Europe, and they'll take care of you and you'll never be sent home or anywhere else.
Well, you know that recently, very good point. You know that recently the mayor, in Texas, let's start there. In
Yeah.
Texas, they've been busing people to Chicago, New York to make a point that why should we have all these people? It's your policies.
Exactly.
You say you're open cities, so here
And
they
now
come.
Joe Biden wants to build
You
a bit.
pay for them.
And now Joe Biden has decided we're going to build a bit of wall in Texas.
We're going to build some wall. Now he has to. He didn't have to before, but now he has to because of Trump. It's all Trump's fault now, or the Republicans' fault. Now I got to do it, but you didn't have to
But you
do
see,
it before.
we never hear this. All we ever, and even from the European Union, where it is becoming an issue, look at Italy and Lampedusa and
Why
other
not
places.
just do it because it's the right thing?
But all we ever hear from the politicians, yes, we've got to control this. We have got to create a safe route so the traffickers don't have to traffic. Not should we be looking at numbers at all, but a safe route. Nobody ever says how many are sufficient. What's the population of Europe? 500 million? So how many do we have to take? 1 million, 2 million, 10 million, 50 million?
It's about
150 million?
It's not 500 million, is it?
Well, the population of Europe, 450, something like that.
Is it that much?
Yeah, well, it's quite a lot.
It's more
But
than
the point
United
is,
States.
even by the United Nations, I think, say 780 million people are prepared to be refugees. I mean, these are just figures which are impossible to contemplate. And the more people arrive in Europe, the less European it is in terms of its ability to give. It's like tourism. Tourism destroys the thing you go and see. You go and see a nice little village in the 60s like Saint-Tropez, and it's nice. And before you know it, 60 years later, tourism has destroyed it, and it's become a place where very wealthy people can buy a handbag while they're having a seaside holiday. But it isn't the little charming fishing village with a few people living there that it once was. And this is happening with immigration. That
It reminds me of Greece.
and people say, oh, the Green Lobby is saying we've got to use less resources. But oh yes, you've got to have open borders. I mean, the two things are wholly incompatible. And the politician, in England, in the United Kingdom, we're getting very excited about these people arriving on the Channel and boats, 25,000 this year.
Yeah.
Who shouldn't. But what people seem to forget is last year, the British government issued visas for 1.2 million people to come to the country as immigrants. I mean, some of those students hopefully will go back. 1.2 million, that's 2% of the population in 1 year. That is not sustainable. When people in the UK complain about the cost of housing, the inability to rent housing, the struggling health service.
Do you think the government here is right or the general, do you think Poland is just being sensible? Because a Finnish friend of mine is saying, gosh, we need to be more like Poland.
Poland is
and
being
the Nordic
sensible. Poland is being sensible.
Yeah, I think
and
so
what
too.
people don't realise about Poland, and they will having watched this programme now, is despite the rhetoric, I think last year Poland issued more visas to non-EU citizens than any other country in the European Union.
That is true. I don't understand why the Germans get away with this, what they're saying, and other
Well, because
people
they're
in Europe.
Germans, you see. This is why. I mean, we're now
Because
touching
they've
on.
got to be right? Or?
The Germans.
We got to end this segment. I'll tell you this. I'll ask you a question on the Germans. Well, it's about America, but the Germans are one of the choices for the answer. What country do you think mostly affected the American accent the general American accent as we know it today? I'm not talking about Southern accent in particular, like mine, but I'm saying, what accent do you think mostly influenced?
What's the choice?
Would it be the British, the Irish, the French, or the German?
It's obviously a trick question, so I'm going to say German.
Yeah, it is German. Apparently, and it influenced the inflection, but not in the South. It's not true in the South.
No.
But I suppose the Germans were a substantial amount of the immigration. In fact, most people, the ethnic group that people in America most trace their roots to would be German.
Which is not something which immediately, because you immediately think of Irish or Italian or British or whatever.
We certainly think of British.
Yeah. Or French maybe in the south.
Or Spanish maybe, but
Spanish.
Spanish or French, or a combination of
But
Spanish
it's German.
and French. They were there early. They were there right at the beginning of all the colonization. Spanish were first, of course. But I found that a very interesting thing.
It is a
I'd like to know if it's actually true, because if it is true, it's the first time I've ever heard it. Okay, thank you for watching. We'll be back. Oh, may I say, before we leave, I got my books here.
Very good books.
Yeah.
Worth reading.
Nicholas, you read this
I've
book,
read that
didn't
one,
you?
yeah, it's very good.
It's freely available on Amazon, anywhere
is.
in the world. It's called Rome. It's an adventure
And I did
story.
have the privilege of meeting the person who inspired the story.
You did?
Yeah,
There
several times.
It's based on a real person that I knew.
Yeah.
And a lot of I traveled to Central America, around Europe, in the United States, and also Vietnam, North Africa, to do research.
He was certainly a
for
character.
this book. Yeah, and it's really an interesting book. Confessions of a Cowboy Capitalist. It's got good reviews,
Yeah.
and so far nobody has thrown one at me. And I put everything I know about writing into this book, so there's all that writing I've been doing over the years. And here's a book of interviews. This is just a collection of interviews. I don't know if you've read this one, have you?
I've read a couple of the interviews.
Yeah, these were all published interviews in various places in the press. I'm going to expand it with other interviews over time, which will include stories about Steven Spielberg and various other famous people in the film business, and Richard Kapuscinski and other figures in Poland and Britain, Bill Bryson, the writer. I've got a lot more to add to this, and it will just be expanding this edition. So,
Something
anyway,
to look out for, the perfect Christmas gift.
they're both good presents, and I'll tell you, the Are You Talking to Me and Rome are available on Amazon. Just put in the name, put my name, and they'll come right up. And you can also order some of my wonderful ebooks. They're there. And you'll have fun. Fun guaranteed. If not, if you don't like it, write me a note. You get your money back. How about that? Okay. That's confidence, isn't it?
It is.
That's good coffee. You just got to put the right whiskey in there, and it's lovely. Yeah. Thanks for watching. We'll be right back after this exciting series of advertisements and commercials and whatever you want to call them. You're going to love this. And watch out for Sherry's Berries. Great stuff. Yes, we're back. I'm going to bring my guitar one of these days and just play along with the song as we come back in. And if you'll play the tambourine.
Yes. Unlikely.
You're not playing.
I may not be available for that particular edition.
Harmonica?
No.
Would you play the harmonica?
Couldn't play any musical instrument, alas.
Oboe?
No.
No. Nose harp?
Nose harp. No.
No. You wouldn't play anything.
I wouldn't play anything.
Maracas?
Wouldn't play anything.
No.
No.
My twin brother, Romondo, is very good.
Yes, he's probably very good with the maracas.
He's very good on the maracas.
Yes.
He's a heck of a player, I would say. Yeah. Yeah, you know, some time ago, we were talking about this problem of immigration some time ago, and just now before the break. I came up with a phrase that I thought kind of neatly encapsulated what's going on, and that is too many people chasing too few goods to live in the style of the people on Friends.
Yes.
And you made that point that people watch television or YouTube or whatever, watch things on the net now more than ever, and they have an idea of what life could be like in the West. And
of course,
life's not like what it is on TV. Nobody lives in New York in a huge flat like that unless mommy and daddy buy it for you.
Well, exactly.
Or you got lucky on the stock market, or very successful.
Well, that's in every film that's like that, isn't it? If you take, I don't know, a film like Notting Hill, there's Hugh Grant as a bookseller. A bookseller would not have been able to afford a flat like his flat in the film. I mean, this is fantasy.
Yeah. And I think that's a shame,
But
actually.
generally, life in the West is obviously much better than it is in a lot of these other countries. You've got to travel. We're very lucky here. And what I think is immensely frustrating, and for most people,
We are lucky. We should remember.
is how our politicians are determined to destroy this, because they've been captured by some weird idea, which then creates chaos for everybody else. But they themselves are safe in the knowledge that whatever nonsense they spout, they and their families will not be subject to the problems they are causing.
What makes them not subject to it?
Because a lot of them are wealthy, because they live in nice areas where you don't have these problems. They don't live in these areas.
They're privileged before, they become privileged because
But, yeah,
they're
but
politicians.
but some of them actually become a lot. I mean, I don't know the Nancy Pelosi, how wealthy she suddenly became. over the time she was in Congress, which shouldn't be possible, actually.
Well, that insider trading is not okay for us, but if you're...
Well, this is my point, and this is part of the problem. Look at Tony Blair, how immensely wealthy he became from politics.
Look at Obama. He just wrote a book. He got a book contract for $100 million.
These people suddenly have nothing, and they earn a fortune. But while they're it wouldn't be so great if they said, "Well, we've made the country the land of milk and honey. Look how fantastic it is." Well, you say, "Okay," which is actually funny. A view they take in Singapore, where senior civil servants are paid huge amounts of money so that they become of quality and incorruptible. That doesn't happen in the West. And I think this is part of the problem. Or they espouse these various woke causes. Or they say, oh, it's great, you don't have to be married. Or every family life, every family alternative, mixed families, this family, that family, whatever. And yet you look at them and their family, and they are married, and they do provide a stable environment for their children. So it's this hypocrisy that they're saying for the masses, this is fantastic for you, but by the way, we live in a different way. And by the way, in our area, we have good police in the suburbs where we're defunding the police for you. We're going to say, defund the police. But in our area, we have very good police and we have private security. And let's face it, yes, schools have to be diverse and they have to follow this. But our children go to very expensive private schools, so our children are not subject to this nonsense. And they stoke up this resentment and this sort of thing. I was thinking of a completely ridiculous example. You could say, and they stoke up resentment, particularly, Black Lives Matter. Of course, the Black Lives matter, but the Black lives that really matter, as I think I've said before, are these women, and where have all the men gone, who are bringing up two teenage boys in the suburbs, desperately trying.
Not in the suburbs.
Well, wherever the areas are, in the big cities.
In the not suburbs.
Yeah, in the not, whatever you call them, yeah. And, they're desperately trying to make sure their boys go to school and learn something. And keep them away from gangs. And some smart ass in Washington is say, let's defund the police. Do you think that woman who's black and her children who are black, do you think they need to, and their lives really do matter because that's the next generation. Do you think they need to live in an environment where there are no policemen but there are gangs in every street corner? I don't think so.
Black people are really annoyed in New York about all the influx. In
exactly.
Chicago, about all these people coming in suddenly, having all the rights and places to stay, the migrants who just budge their way over the border.
My question is, why are the politicians allowing this?
Force their way over the border. That's what I wanted to ask you. I cannot see any logical reason other than wanting to change the demographic for your own power.
Well, that was certainly
to create a proletariat.
Tony Blair's motivation in 1997. He thought he'd teach the nation a lesson for having ever voted Tory, would allow vast numbers of immigrants in on the grounds they'd be so grateful they would vote Labour.
I don't think it works.
It doesn't work, but that was actually...
It's turning conservative. It's turning Hispanics and blacks into conservatives.
Because they can see the chaos as well, and that's what they escaped from.
They're Americans.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. This is the strength of America.
Their country.
And this strength of America is being undermined by this left-wing privileged lot. The trash that comes out from Silicon Valley, these billionaire people who are completely out of control.
Do you know how many times...
spout, on Facebook now, it's become unusable. It's full of advert. You can be banned for abusing community standards. Nobody tells you what they are. But Zuckerberg is married. Zuckerberg doesn't live in the sort of chaos he's allowing people to promote on Facebook. I mean, the whole thing is weird, and thrice weird.
Well, Zuckerberg is a weird-looking guy. He looks like an alien.
Well, exactly.
You seen that guy without his shirt on?
No.
And he's in his wrestling. He does the jiu-jitsu.
The whole thing is very. But this is these people have too
nerds as tough guys.
These people have too much power. But what they say and what they promote, it's not the way they and their families live their lives. And this is the point: mass hypocrisy. And I don't understand why. We saw, another silly example: Nigel Farage with Coutts Bank in England. They spend all the woke this, and it's Pride Week, so let's paint the bank branch in rainbow colours. What does that prove? Why not concentrate on actually doing what your customers want, which is to run a bank, instead of all this political nonsense?
To take care of their money and help them to prosper.
Exactly, instead of actually saying, well, we're going to close your bank account because you've said something which we don't like. It's getting very, very like China.
Yeah, it's a privilege for you to have a bank account.
Yeah. And you've abused it by having a thought of which we pretend to disapprove.
Pretend to disapprove.
Because our chairman and his family have that thought, and that's okay.
Gosh.
And they get paid millions of pounds a year and have nice company cars as a result. But you, our mere customer who might run a small business somewhere, no, we're going to try to control your thought.
Let's go to follow this immigration idea for now to the point where we talked about it briefly earlier, where the Democrats have been saying there shouldn't be borders. Should there be borders? No. That's what they're saying. That's the general. The further left you get, they don't want borders. And yet, they can't really call themselves self-respecting communists because the communists were always about borders. And guess what? You can't leave.
Exactly, different sort
Was
of
the
border.
point, wasn't it?
Well, the people who say we don't want borders, I'd be very happy to meet them and move into their house, assuming their house was nicer than my house. Because a border is only, and this is where the philosophy of Roger Scruton is very good. Because A, for the philosophy is actually quite easy to read, which is pretty good for a philosopher. But B, this is his starting point. You are a person and you have a place and it's your place. And then there are other people around you and it's their place. And therefore you have a communal interest in this place from which everything, your life is based, you protect it. And without borders, that disappears. So if you don't have a border of the country, then I want to move into your house because that's just a different border.
Well,
you cannot have any civil, you cannot have property, you cannot have any civilized life without borders.
Well, they're not
and
saying
boundaries.
that they don't want a border. What they're saying is we want to run it the way we want to run it until we say so, and until we build our constituency so you never win again.
Exactly.
You evil people.
That's it. That's it. So it's massive.
We want to take over.
It's complete hypocrisy.
It's more totalitarian thinking, but it's also very confused, and I think a lot of it's based on
it's based
ignorance.
It's based on ignorance. It's based on the ability to speak
history.
And not and not face the consequences of your words.
Look, you're an educated man. I went to a few, way too many universities, and we've read a lot and been around a lot over time, and it's still confusing to us. It must be overwhelming to people who haven't spent that time doing that and that have spent it, for example, learning a trade that they're excellent at.
Well, this is the other thing, of course.
Or building a business.
The undermining of good, honest toil. I remember once getting into a cab in London. The cabbies are the repository of all common sense and knowledge. And one guy started talking to me. He said,
they're crazy sometimes.
He said, my dad worked on the docks all his life, worked on the docks, never had a penny to his name. But he said to me, you know what, son? Socialism is a luxury the working man can't afford. That really is profound.
What a great statement. Well, that caps what I was saying.
Yeah, because it's as Mrs. Thatcher said, the trouble with socialism is you eventually run out of other people's money.
Well, I remember having a Cockney driving me home one night. I lived in Brixton, and I just bought a flat there, and I was very happy about it. And it was a nice place. And when I said where I wanted to go, he said, "Oh, it's a poxy gaff, Gov." I just started laughing. I said, "I used to live in Hampstead. Is that better?" He said, "Oh, that's nice." Exactly. I was like, "No, it's nice there. It's not so bad, believe me."
Yeah, of course.
I've lived in both. It's not so bad. But that is the sort of common sense of the cab driver, I suppose. I remember walking around in the Brixton riots, so it wasn't all roses.
No, but they were very...
I went out, I was writing about it, so I went out and walked.
But see, the left have to stoke up this grievance.
Yeah.
And there was a report done by the commission by the British government a few years ago by some very eminent, I forget his, Dr. Sewell? Anyway, he was of Afro-Caribbean heritage. And he concluded that things weren't perfect, but there was no sort of institutionalized racism which people in the United Kingdom faced. But of course the left hated him because he'd come to the wrong answer. You look at the British cabinet now, the ethnic makeup of the British cabinet, these are folk from all over the place. Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
But the left think, oh, these are the wrong sort of immigrants.
And then, but wait a second, it's great because a guy like Sunak's coming in, he's an Indian. We have another guy, Ramaswamy, in the United States running the Republican side. And then another lady, Nikki, what's her last name? oh gosh, on the tip of my tongue. She's, you know, out there, I'm sure a lot of you know, Nikki Haley, yeah, who was governor of South Carolina. And they're both of Indian descent. Like Sunak, and they talk a lot of sense.
But my point is the left.
Are we going to be rescued by the Indians?
But the point is the left. The left
system.
can't accept that because these are the wrong sort of immigrant, the wrong sort of ethnic minority.
Oh, I see your point.
They are not stoking up the fires of grievance which they should be, because you are black. You have suffered a disadvantage. I have to stoke up your feelings of resentment so that I can actually keep you
all
dependent on me.
All black people are the same. They all have the same thought.
Yeah, nonsense.
You're not black if you're not a Democrat, as Biden said.
Exactly.
You ain't black, Jack.
What is the phrase?
About?
Coconut or whatever. Black on the outside, white on the inside. These people are.
Well, we're all black on the inside.
They're
what
sowing
is wrong
division. They're sowing division where division need not exist, and this is the evil of it.
Yeah.
The absolute evil of all of this. In fact,
we need
this identity politics is
We need more moderation, more fairness, and we're going to have to duke it out in the center in order to go forward, even if it's slowly, and it'll be much better for everyone, because these extremes on both sides are killing us, and we see what they did in the 1930s. I mean, we have a perfect example of extremes out of control. I mean, you know, we're sitting here and we're having a nice discussion, but my God, we're not far from nuclear war, and that's not.
We're
a
not
panic
far. One of
statement.
the issues, though, and it's quite relevant, is people say, oh well, in the Second World War, not all the Germans were Nazis, blah 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 blah, and that may or may not be true, but it doesn't matter who's what. All that matters in any society at any time is the makeup of the population of males aged between 20 and 40, because they're the ones who fight, actually. And that's what's important, because in 1930s Germany, that percentage of the population were the ones who were encouraged and did take part in joining the army or whatever.
You got to take care of your young men.
My point is, and this will people will write.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and people will write and say, "Yo, this is terrible stuff." But if you
Why?
look at
Why
the
is
UK,
it
no,
terrible
but I haven't finished what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Then
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
All right.
And
Lay it on me.
And if you look at the demographic projections, say for the United Kingdom, within 20 years, if not sooner, the greatest proportion of males aged between 20 and 40 will be people who are not of British ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah, and some of them recent immigrants.
Yes, and so when they take against it, then you have the big problem. And this is what we're facing, because this is the generation whom the left is encouraging to feel alienated, to feel they had a bad deal. You don't have to do any work at school because institutional racism means you can't get a good job anyway. This is a sort of poison the left are pouring into these young people's ears all the time. And this is the real problem. And this is why the politicians are, they're letting loose forces they will not be able to control.
Well, this is a well-known communist type of propaganda that began long ago in the 70s.
And you look at the other
80s.
thing, just because I think it's interesting. What are the chances of me going to any of these countries in Africa?
Which is affecting them now, too.
Going to any of these countries in Africa or Asia from which we have all these migrants, and going there and either me or my children or my grandchildren becoming Prime Minister. None whatever. A, I wouldn't get into the country as an immigrant.
That's right.
B, if I did, I'd always be a second-class citizen. So
Right.
my children or grandchildren would have no chance of becoming Prime Minister. And this, of course, is the reason why our European and American society is so good, because people do have this chance. But we will
New blood.
We will be destroying that chance for them if we don't keep a control as to
Well, what's the
a
key?
balance in the
What's
society.
the key then to keeping that control? Is you have to
You have to
a
have
nation
borders,
of law,
and you have to
borders
enforce
and
your
law,
your
and
rules.
you have to enforce it. You can't let criminals run around
Exactly.
wild. You have to, keep a lid on this stuff and make it more palatable, make it not even palatable, attractive to do things the right way.
And you have to be tough. And look at Sweden. We think, the Swedes are nice people. Now, ever since the Vikings, they've been nice and yet look at the terrible trouble they have with gangs and murders in Sweden.
Under the surface, they're still the same people.
But the actual, I'm talking about the problems they have now.
You don't want
with
to fight
immigrants.
against the Finns or the Swedes
No,
anymore.
well, not the Finns.
They get excited.
The Finns are fine, but my point is, they have allowed this to get out, and they have things we never had in Sweden 25 years ago. Gang warfare, areas where the police are frightened or unable to go.
Yeah, but this is because of this.
This is because they know, well, you're welcome. Well, we welcome all migrants, whoever you are, whatever your intentions.
It's hyperpassivity,
Yeah.
which is artificial hyperpassivity. It is not the way people really feel underneath. It's the way they feel they should because of some kind of
They're
guilt.
frightened of speaking out.
It's guilt.
We saw in this case with these schoolgirls in various cities in England where they're terrible over a number of years. Young girls have been taken from and raped, essentially drugged and raped by, largely, I have to say, because it's a fact, people of Pakistani heritage. But nobody wanted to say anything, including the police, because they didn't want to be accused of being racist. So these poor teenage girls were drugged, raped, treated in a terrible fashion, even some from children's homes where they should have been looked after, because everybody was frightened it was racist to say anything.
Did they know who was doing it?
Yeah.
I'm surprised there was no...
Some of it, in South Yorkshire, they even had to change the chief constable. It was happening within yards of the police station.
I heard about that. I'm surprised there was no sort of Charles Bronson-style response.
Well,
to
I
this.
once said to a friend, actually, maybe it was to you, I don't think it was to you, somebody else who was from it. I said, would this have happened in America? And they said no, because in America the neighbours would have got their guns out and these people would have been dead before they touched another girl. So there is something. There is something to be said.
But I suspect
there is something to
be
be said for the right to carry arms in
suspect
specific
it could be true.
Yeah, but in certain things people don't try it on in America.
I mean, how would you feel if this happened to your? I'm going to leave it at that. But
Yeah, well,
how would you
exactly.
feel if it happened to your daughter, and there was no justice for it?
Well, exactly, which of course is a theme
You'd be tempted, wouldn't you?
of the John Grisham film, A Time to Kill. Of course, is a very good story. Which is
I love that film.
and the film is
actually.
brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. That is a wonderful film.
Samuel L. Jackson.
And with Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, it's a
and,
very good film,
yeah.
actually. And the book's very good as well.
Sandra Bullock.
Sandra Bullock, yeah, it's a great film. But it does...
One of my favorites.
It does raise an interesting point. How
It's
would you
on
feel?
Netflix now, folks.
Yeah.
You can watch that great
Yeah,
film.
yeah, Time to Kill.
Yeah.
Great film. So, but we need politicians who don't just waffle inanities. Oh, yes, we've got to stop it. We need people who actually do things. And if they're not prepared to do it, they should get out of the way and let other people who are prepared to do it.
This is a huge thing that the mayor of New York and the mayor of Chicago went to the border, and the mayor of New York has gone to Mexico City, and apparently he's going to Colombia and one other country, I don't remember what it is, maybe Ecuador, is going to talk to people to say, I guess, don't stop sending
it's a bit
people.
late.
We don't have room for it. But why? This has been going on for so long. Why didn't they do it sooner? Because they weren't. The people were staying in Texas and New Mexico and California. They weren't being sent north, and that is the only way. And sending them to Washington.
These people are being
the Washington
used
government is
by,
so left.
They're being used by the Democratic Party in the same way, that Lukashenko is using similar people by busing them to the Polish border, essentially to make a point.
That's right.
And the Democrats make this, sanctuary cities. Look at what...
Well, it's not the same point. No, it's
but,
not
but,
the same
but
point.
the idea that people can come there and there's no,
it's not the same
federal
point,
law's
though.
not going to apply.
I can't let you say that.
All right, but...
It's quite different. It's quite a different point. Because in the case of there's complicity by political elites in the open border that allows people to stream into Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. There is not complicity on the Polish side or the European Union
there isn't.
side.
But I'm talking about the people being used.
I know, but
for
let me
another
finish my statement. It needs to be said, Nicholas. It needs to be clear, as people jump to conclusions, that there is no complicity between the EU, any of the EU governments, and the Russian or the Belarusian.
But I was rather making the point about people being
so-called governments,
deliberately used. These
totalitarian
unfortunate people.
institutions.
You know, the Democrats
autocratic
are using these people to try and make a point against the federal government or the Republicans or whatever they're trying to do, and they're reaping the whirlwind in these cities. And this is the point.
Well, they are, and that's why you've got the people living in those cities, particularly the people who stand, who are using the existing social services, are protesting widely and availably on, you can see it on the news, in council meetings, etc., public meetings, about this inundation of migration. Is it migration? I don't know. Is it? That doesn't seem right. Inundation of it's an invasion.
It's an invasion. No, you can't say it because that's racist.
It is that walking invasion that we
would
remember from that Channel 4 movie.
Which seemed at the time so incredible.
Yeah, 30 years ago or whenever. And seemed just so far removed from anything that could really happen, and it's happened in the United States. Now, it's even prompted President Biden to come out and say, oh, we got to have that wall. I've got to do it. I don't want to do it, but I've got to do it because the Republicans are making me do it because they passed a law.
The rubbish.
If that were the case, he'd have had to do it in the beginning. He also blamed the Republicans for that disaster in Afghanistan.
You see, this is the point.
But the Republicans, let me finish, but the Republicans didn't say, oh, you have to leave Afghanistan in the most slipshod, ridiculous fashion possible and leave all the equipment. That was not in the agreement.
Of course not.
So, God, I had somebody talk, these Democrat, I voted Democrat and I voted Republican. I'm an independent since I was a kid. And I had someone just I got friends in both parties at a high level. And I had somebody that I know well giving me these Democratic talking points at a meeting. And I was like, hey, we know each other. Why are you talking to me like this?
Exactly.
You know that I know that you don't believe what you're saying because you're too smart to believe what you're saying. He just stopped, looked at me. We dropped it for then. He came back later and we just started talking again. But, these talking points are crazy. That's why I say we've got to get moderate. We've got to come back to the middle and solve these things through reasonable discussions. You've got to come to reasonable conclusions that fit the 70 to 85%.
Otherwise, if you
80% of the people.
don't look after the centre and the reasonable discussions, these are the circumstances in which those people are then driven to vote for the extremists because only the extremists listen to them and actually offer any solution.
Which puts us right back to
Which puts you right back to the 1930s.
Correct. That's what I wanted to say. We don't want to go back to the 1930s, folks. We got to end this excellent discussion with Nicholas Richardson, journalist, lawyer, writer of, what do you call them, of feuilletons in Poland, of essays, essay writer, and also correspondent speaking about Middle East. How many shows you? Almost 100, right? Since you started.
I think today, when we recorded, I think it was number 79.
Yeah. So you've done a lot of those shows, which run on another network.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching, everyone, and see you next time.